But next is a review of the Nordic research literature on physical learning environments. And that's Palmyre Pierroux, University of Oslo, and Bodil Bøjer from the Royal Danish Academy. Please, Palmyre.
And this is, yes, great. Thank you for allowing me to be here and participate in this final presentation of our work from the last 3 years. I'm going to talk about the work that we've been doing over the period of the whole project, pretty much, on our literature review. And Tina Maria said something about the database that we've all been contributing to over this time, and I'm going to say a little bit about what we did with it from there. So when we thought about, one of the things about this network was the opportunity to see what is there, well, is there something? What have we been doing in the Nordic countries in this field and research? And what methods have we been using, and what have we been finding out? When you think about it broadly, the question is, how do school environments draw on and promote educational values such as equity, inclusion, and sustainability, as well as support innovative pedagogies, well-being, and learning? This is a very broad question, obviously, and we see here the kind of cross-sectoral context that's necessary and that drives international research on learning environment design. So in narrowing this down for our network participation, we identified the following aims: that in the Nordic context, we wanted to analyze and clarify these different cross-sector interests and approaches. We wanted to identify the Nordic research strengths, gaps, and future directions, and to the extent possible, situate Nordic LED research in the international research landscape. So the way we went about this, we call it a modified scoping review, is that we focused on the last 15 years of peer-reviewed articles in English published between 2010 and 2025, that the representatives and the experts from each country selected and contributed to the database. We started there. These selections were then refined through iterative additions and deletions through meetings by the expert groups in each country. And then we did, to supplement this work, keyword searches in Scopus and Google Scholars to identify any omissions or additions. As the next step then was to go through each publication and provisionally assign a primary research theme based on its title and keywords. And here we used AI to work with this kind of first scope classification process. But the thematic framework was iteratively developed and calibrated through analyses of abstracts from mainly the Finnish and the Swedish publications. Finland and Sweden together have published more than half of the data set. So they have really been leading countries in the Nordic research on this theme, on this topic. By this process, we identified 7 overarching thematic categories, which were then applied across the full corpus. The research themes then were applied to all of the remaining categories, or the remaining publications. And in total, we had 116, ended up with 116 publications, and that were analyzed, and I'm going to say a little bit more about how that looked. So the 7 Nordic themes that we identified, or the 7 themes we identified as really important or present in the Nordic research, we started with the pedagogy, space, interaction, and teaching practices. And this is research or studies on how teachers' pedagogical approaches interact with the digital physical learning environments. The second prominent theme we call spatial design, typologies, and affordances. And this is the work that's done looking at how the design or the floor plans or the architectural design supports or constrains or encourages particular activities and patterns of use. The next category is the focus on student experiences and experience and agency perspectives, student perspectives, and how these actively shape learning environments. The next theme is participatory design and co-creation, and this is a tradition in the Nordic countries, also particularly so, we would like to claim, where we develop processes that involve students and teachers and other stakeholders in actively taking part in shaping and evaluating and improving learning environments. So not just necessarily at the beginning or planning of a building, but throughout a process. The fifth theme is policy and governance, and this is the work being done on how educational policies, administrative structures, regulatory frameworks, and institutional decision-making impact the design, organization, and use of learning environments. The sixth theme is a focus on well-being, inclusion, and health, as Tina Maria has talked about, how physical, social, and organizational characteristics of learning environments impact students and teachers' emotional well-being, physical health, motivation, sense of safety, etc. And the final characteristic of Nordic research on learning environmental designs is outdoor, informative, and alternative spaces. So how does this look? This graph here shows the distribution of the weighting of these different themes by the different countries in their research. We see that Finland and Sweden are clearly lead in the number of publications, Denmark as well, of publications in pretty much all of the themes. It also shows some of the differences and similarities in among the different countries. But Norway and Iceland are also represented in each category with publications as well. In doing this process and doing the review process and landing on these 7 themes, what we also found were there were themes that weren't captured by this kind of look across. And in particular, we identified some distinct national topics and research interests that were apparent in the different countries. And this indicates also the breadth of the research conducted in the field. Norway and Denmark are distinct, for example, in a focus on physical environment, indoor climate, while Iceland is the only country to focus on post-occupancy evaluation. And the other interesting observation to make here is the focus on language, culture, and inclusion. That is really a leading, Finland, which really leads this area amongst the Nordic countries. And also on digital technologies and future competencies is also Finland leading the area there. That's a whole other topic that we'll look forward to exploring when we get to the report, what we have found there. That's pretty interesting. The physical and indoor indoor climates and those issues are more in the range of technical papers, so they're quite focused on measurements that perhaps fall outside the pedagogical perspectives, but there are some studies where they look at potential connections there. And if we look at kind of a breakdown by number, we can see Finland was leading the number of publications with 36 publications, and then Sweden and Denmark with 26 and 24 publications respectively in the review accounted for a significant share. Norway and Iceland had the fewest publications with 16 and 14 publications respectively. This gives a kind of overview of the initial look at Nordic research on in this field. And I'm going to invite my colleague, Bodil Bøjer from Denmark, to talk about the work that we did looking at some of the methods that we use and some of our strengths and gaps, and kind of summarizing our findings. Bodil?
Thank you, Palmyre. So, well, as Palmyre said, my name is Bodil Bøjer, and I'm working as an associate professor at the Royal Danish Academy. And I will talk a little bit about the methods that we found in this in our literature study as well. Because we looked at different types of methods that are commonly used in Nordic learning environment design research in the literature that we reviewed, and we found that there's a preference for qualitative methods in the Nordic studies, or mixed methods approaches. And when we looked across the articles in the study, there were 15 different methods identified used in the Nordic countries in research. And of this, the most frequently used studies, sorry, nope, I don't have to change, you did that already, thank you. Of this, the most frequently used were observations or on-site visits in schools. Then there were a lot of surveys and questionnaires as well, and document or policy analysis. So they were the main methods used in all the studies that we looked at. And these are common methods in qualitative research, so it's not surprising that these are some of the most used methods. But interestingly, we also find that there were some innovative and collaborative methods that were used in the Nordic studies. And these approaches were, for example, photo voice or visual documentation. It was co-design or workshops. And focus groups were also significantly represented in the articles that we read. And these innovative and collaborative research approaches, we find them really interesting because I think they're quite unique for the Nordic for the Nordic studies that we use them quite a lot. What was often used was for example participatory workshops, where we gathered data, or where data was gathered through for example diamond ranking, which is a method that's developed in England, which you see over here, where you rank photos, and people work actively to contribute to the research. It was also co-design activities, such as space studying, which you see in the middle, where you sort of map the learning space together with the users, and then prototyping, making models, for example, of furniture and spaces. Another innovative and collaborative approach is more of a technical character. It's, for example, audio recordings or video, which we see here, which is time-lapse videos that our colleague Marco uses, sits there in the middle, where you make time lapses to see how the actual learning spaces are used, and that way you collect data. So based on our literature review and in relation to several meta-reviews of international research in learning environment design, we have identified some strengths, but also some gaps in Nordic research. And I would like to take you through them now. What we see is that there's a strong Nordic tradition in participatory design, as Palmyre also mentioned, and qualitative studies of learning environments. The participatory approaches are amongst the most mature and widely researched topics in the Nordic countries. But still there's a limited use of systematic evaluation of participatory approaches. So that's something we need to look more into. There's also a need for approaches that more frequently incorporates learners' voices in design processes. Then we found that there's extensive research on pedagogy-space relationships, These are broadly studied using diverse methods, both internationally and across the Nordic countries. But still, we have identified a need for more robust, empirical, and interdisciplinary studies and frameworks and methodological developments. And in the Nordic research, we mostly see single country. Nordic research is mostly single country based and lacks comparative and collaborative studies on learning environments across the Nordic countries. And that is, of course, what this Nordic collaboration aims to contribute to. Finally, taxonomies and shared language, they are developed and they need to adopt a common categorization of architectural space types and functions is currently being addressed, as we will look more into later today as well, in both Nordic but also international learning environment design research. So based on this, we suggest that there are the following future directions for Nordic learning environment design, research. As you see here in the bottom, what we see is that there's a growing focus on both behavioral, societal, and sustainability aspects of learning environments, but they are not yet consistently integrated into research frameworks. And this is both a Nordic and an international challenge that needs to be addressed. In the Nordic countries, as we said, we're very strong in qualitative research, and we've done a vast amount of empirical studies in the individual educational contexts, but there are very few qualitative, large quantitative or mixed method studies that links learning environment design to, for example, learning outcomes or well-being in a larger scale. So a future direction would be to develop the instruments and the methods for scaling up comparative and collaborative research projects across the Nordic countries, but even internationally. And then finally, on a more concrete level, we have identified a pressing need for research and design in approaches to develop teachers' spatial competences, because these have been found to be crucial for the alignment of the space or the pedagogy-space relationship. And spatial competences, we tend to define these as teachers' skills in seeing and shaping the physical learning environment as a responsive part of educational practice, with an aim to foster inclusion, student-centered learning, and well-being. So, sort of including the learning environment as part of the pedagogical toolbox. Thank you.